The meeting of the Public Safety Committee is now called to order. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderman Vaccaro.
Present.
Alderman Cone. Alderman Arnowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard.
Present.
Alderman Coder. Here. Alderwoman Spencer.
Present.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd.
Here.
Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
You have 7 present, Mr.
Would you
Chairman.
please excuse Alderman Arnowitz and Cone? The committee has 4 bills before it today. We have several committee members that have to go back to Streets Committee. So let's take up Board Bill number 9 first, sponsored by Alderwoman Ingracia. And we could take a motion to place the bill before us for discussion purposes.
I move that we put the bill before us for discussion. Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we place Board Bill 9 before us for discussion purposes. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Vaccaro.
Aye.
Alderman Cone. Alderman Arnowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderman Coder. Aye. Alderwoman Spencer.
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Chairman Kennedy.
Aye.
You have 7 aye votes, Mr. Chairman.
By your vote, we sustain the motion. So those members that do have to go back to streets, we have a role. You can go back if you need to. But if you don't need to, you don't have to go back. Okay. I didn't mean to vacate the chambers. Okay. Alderwoman, you can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Board Bill 9 before you today is a technical change to an ordinance that we passed in March of 2018. It might be a little bit confusing for you today. For some reason, its companion bill was assigned to legislation. So I do have Matt Moak here with the Problem Properties Office to just explain. You can tell with the strike-throughs that there was a duplicative certified that didn't need to be in the bill, and then on page 2, the certification again is redundant. And that's really the gist of it. Board Bill 26, its companion bill, has a bit more to it, and Matt's available for questions if you have them, and as well as I.
Okay. Alderman Vaccaro, any questions?
No, 22 comes up Thursday, right?
Yeah, 26 is in committee on Thursday. Thank you.
Alderwoman Hubbard, any questions?
So the companion bill is in another committee?
It's in another committee.
Okay.
Okay. Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I did miss the purpose of the bill. What's the overall purpose?
This is correcting it's just a technical correction, and then Board Bill 26 has the money. It was going to the collector of revenue, and it should be going to the comptroller.
I understand. So this is a companion bill to another bill
In a different committee.
that hasn't been heard yet, but
Will be heard Thursday.
great. Sounds spectacular.
Are there any other further questions from members of the committee?
I think we got enough to vote. We got 5.
We need 6.
Let me,
I mean, we could take previous roll, but
I
he's
can
in the previous
they
roll.
won't let you do, well, they said we can't do previous roll when they're not in the room.
With who?
According to Lou, we can't do previous roll if they're not in the room. I can just have Pam.
Because, okay, if you step out of the room and make a previous roll, then you were put down as having voted on that bill. Well, that's kind of like how I tried to put a stop to that since I've been here. So, I mean, it's up to you how you want to run your meeting. So, okay.
So you want to do can you do?
Let's do it.
Okay, I'm good with it. So then
Entertain a motion.
then I will make a motion that we pass Board Bill 9 out with a do-pass recommendation.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Previous roll.
Been moved and seconded that we pass Board Bill 9 out with a do-pass recommendation. There's been a request for previous roll. Any opposition to previous roll? Seeing none by your vote, we sustain the motion to pass out Board Bill 9 with a do-pass recommendation.
Thank you.
That now takes us to Board Bill 182.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Board Bill 182 amends what we've referred to here at City Hall since 2014 as a demolition by neglect ordinance. No one has taken advantage or tried to move legislation like this forward, and I was interested in doing it on a problematic building in the 6th Ward, and so sat down with the City Councilor's office and some of the people from the Vacancy Collaborative, and it was determined that we needed some language to clear up the certification of undue economic hardship. There is a provision in the ordinance that, allows for people to prove that they're not economically able to keep up on a building as one of the reasons that you can circumvent the demolition by neglect ordinance. And for technical legal questions, I have Barb Burkett with the City Attorney's Office.
It changes the definition?
It just makes it more clear how the process works to get certified under economic hardship.
So she can come and speak to the details of that?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Would you please come forward, identify yourself?
Hi, I'm Barbara Burkett from the St. Louis City Councilor's Office. As this ordinance was passed, but it has not been applied, and reviewing it with a view towards making clean findings, rational findings, I had thought that the definition of economic hardship, there's a hearing officer that's going to have to hear the case and make a finding, and that definition was added to give the officer the tool to say what he would have to find. If he were to find undue hardship, if that claim were made, how would that occur? So it should be there to make the administration of the bill and of the demolition by neglect ordinance crystal clear and easy to administer.
We can take any questions from members of the committee. Alderman Vaccaro?
Yeah, Barb, I'm confused. Yeah. So demolition by neglect, does this mean if somebody's not taking care of their house, we can go knock it down?
No, that was a ordinance previously establishing a violation of demolition by neglect. And I guess the term means, and we have people in that industry, Dan Krasnoff, our Director of Cultural Resources, it's sort of a phenomena that people don't maintain property to building code and just allow it by neglect to demolish their building, and it creates a lot of hardship, a lot of economic hardship for the city and a lot of hardship for neighborhoods. And this was the demolition by neglect ordinance, which I'm sorry if you don't have the actual ordinance. It was designed to address that problem, to identify properties where that was happening, to cause them to be able to have meetings about that, to be able to make a plan in lieu of being prosecuted, and then to be able to prosecute them in the event that that all failed. It's not exactly the same as condemnation, so it's just another tool.
But if somebody isn't taking care of their home and there's violations, then this would allow the city to knock their house down?
No, I think that the Cultural Resource Director, may I turn the floor to him? He seems
Sure,
to want to.
yeah, I just need a better understanding.
Sure.
So I'm kind of a poor person, my house is in neglect.
Sure.
But it's a place to live.
Well,
The city has cited me now for blah.
a big impetus for the creation of this ordinance in
Please
2014.
identify yourself.
I'm sorry?
Identify yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Daniel Krasnoff. I'm the Cultural Resources Director for the City of St. Louis. An impetus for the creation of this ordinance was the loss of a building in Couples Station. That's a very historic building that, unfortunately, a developer had purchased and had not maintained well, and then, because they were hoping to redevelop it and take advantage of tax credits and things, and the way it worked out, the building became so deteriorated, it ended up being demolished. And so the impetus for creating the ordinance was a desire to protect some of our most historic buildings. So if you're a homeowner, to speak directly to your question, the chances of this ordinance affecting you are almost none. There has to be a finding that the building is what we call a high-merit building, according to Ordinance 64689. And a high-merit building is a building that's either individually eligible for listing in the National Register or is a building that is a major structure, considered a major structure in a historic district. So the average homeowner in the city of St. Louis, the vast majority of them, this will not apply to their home at all, and they would not come under the directive of this ordinance. It's designed, if we have particularly historic buildings that are highly significant, then an owner has, for a long period of time, neglected, and this was created as a tool in addition to what the building division has for its tools in order to try to be able to have a more effective response to the neglect of our most historic structures.
You mind if I add to that? Thank you. The way that these laws have to be written so that they are constitutional, we cannot differentiate between a vacant property owner and an owner of somebody who's living in their home. But the way that these laws get applied under problem properties and a number of other laws is that they are for vacant properties. And so what happens a lot of times, and why this moved forward in 2014, was that there are people who own, or entities that own vacant properties, they continue to let them deteriorate and don't address the code violations, and so they fall in on themselves, and their motivations are varied. They could be waiting for a big payout, they think there's going to be some redevelopment, or they think that eventually this property is going to hold some value that it currently does not. And this gives the city another tool in the toolbox to allow us to address vacant properties that are becoming problematic for neighborhoods.
But realistically, though, I mean, it could be used against a homeowner that still lives in that house that's neglecting it. Are you saying there's absolutely no way it could be used? But to me, it seems like it could be used to take out a homeowner. And in my neighborhood, I get it's not going to happen, but there are neighborhoods where people are doing the best they can.
Sure, and I understand your concern and your question to that point. Unfortunately, we are not allowed, because of constitutional law, to apply laws to people differently. So in practice, what happens in the Problem Properties Department, when they go after some of the most egregious properties, they're not kicking people out of their homes.
But they could.
They technically could.
Okay, that was I'm done. I was just curious. So they could take somebody out of their home.
This bill that
Oh, Barb,
they're
you might-
amending. I'm sorry. I'm a loud talker anyway.
I know,
This-
but the camera can't
This
get
bill that's being amended, just to make it more clear and more fair and more easy to administer, is already a law. And I have a copy. Is it okay if I show the board so that they might pass it?
I believe that this is part of the packet that we have.
Oh,
Board Bill
okay, okay. I just wanted to make
332,
that
it's in the
clear.
back of this ordinance, of the proposed board bill. So we have Board Bill 332 as a part of our packet.
Okay, I didn't know. I just wanted to make it clear. That's already passed, and that's already a law. And if you look at the last 3 pages, like Section 11 and beyond, those show the consequences of what happens under this law. And that's true whether or not this amendment gets passed. This was just to make it more clear, more easy to administer, and better bill.
Well, I would, we still got plenty of time. I would almost rather take the time to really read and understand this. I mean, it just seems that it makes it easier to administer, which means it makes it easier to put somebody out of their home.
No, I'm sorry. This bill was only to, if someone it says somebody who is identified by the building commissioner, and the building commissioner says, hey, we're sending you a notice, we believe your property is allowing, to be, and actually that process has started with the Cultural Resources Director. Preservation Board votes as to whether or not this property is a high merit property that this applies to. Then it goes to the building commissioner, and he sends a notice out. Then that person, at some point, one of the things that person can do, that property owner can do, is to say, I'm claiming economic hardship. I'm claiming that as a defense. And then when they get a hearing on just that in this bill, and this Board Bill 182 was just in the event that that happens, how that would be defined, what they would, so that that property owner would know exactly what they needed to prove, and that hearing officer that hears it would know exactly what they needed to find to say they had economic hardship or they did not have it in their opinion. So that's all this amendment was going to do.
It provides a layer of protection for people.
There's already an ordinance,
Right.
Yes,
and that ordinance allows for undue economic hardship.
yes,
And so what you're doing in this new bill is further clarifying the definition of economic hardship and what are the markers they should look for when considering that. But the present ordinance already says you can claim undue economic hardship.
Yes.
And there's a hearing that's held
yes,
when you do that. So that's the present law right now.
yes.
All this does is makes it, you're attempting to further define what that means.
Yeah,
and
so
how that should
everyone
happen.
knows when they go to that hearing and have that hearing, what would the hearing officer have to find in order to find that they have it or they don't have it? So it should be just very clear.
Were you complete?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Technically, it goes to Alderwoman Hubbard, then we'll come to you. Alderwoman Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. With all due respect, we don't remember bills from 4 or 5, 6 years ago, whatever. So, I mean, it's kind of gray, but I do have some questions. So, is this only applicable in a preservation review district, or is this citywide?
It's citywide. It's any building that can be deemed a high-merit historic building, and there's a definition of high-merit historic building under the ordinance that Cultural Resources operates.
Okay, and so if a particular property is demolished, then would that land still be maintained by the owner, or would it become the city's property?
It would eventually go to LRA or could be purchased by a private owner.
Okay, well, I have a problem with that process.
I just wanted to say, I mean, the goal of the ordinance is to keep a building from being demolished, not to demolish a building. The goal is to create some tools where the city has more opportunity to step in and ensure that a building that's being neglected gets proper maintenance and has building code violations addressed. And again, this would only probably apply to about, I would say, 3 to 5% of the buildings in the city of St. Louis, because only, I would say, 3 to 5% of our buildings, of the thousands of buildings we have, are high-merit buildings. Almost all the buildings in the city of St. Louis are not high-merit buildings. Most of them, by the definition of the ordinance, are not individually eligible for listing on the National Register or a major building within a potential or existing National Register district. So this is a very narrow ordinance that's on the books already that really would only apply to our most historic and most neglected structures. But the goal here is the preservation of the buildings, not the demolition of the buildings.
Okay, and so if that's the case, then we couldn't have drawn up an ordinance with just those 3 to 5%, like you said, we couldn't have named them specifically in the bill? Because when you do a citywide and you're saying that it possibly won't even impact the entire city as far as buildings, then I don't see why we couldn't specifically name that 3 to 5%, that if by chance these buildings come up and there's this issue regarding them, then we could address it that way.
I think the effort to do a citywide survey and identify those 3 to 5% of buildings in advance would be hard to do. The other thing is that by the definition of how the National Register works, a building has to be 50 years old for consideration. So there are buildings that as years go by weren't eligible for consideration for the National Register that then do become eligible. But frankly, with a staff of about 4 or 5 folks at Cultural Resources, we don't have the resources to survey every building in the city to determine at which ones would be considered high merit. It's just to say that there is a strong safeguard that would keep this from being something that's used on a large portion of the buildings. Because let's say you're in Soulard or other historic districts. Well, a typical 2-family in Soulard isn't individually eligible for listing on the National Register. It's listed because the district as a whole creates a historic neighborhood, but only a few of the buildings in Soulard are probably eligible for individual listing on the National Register, which means even in our, in the neighborhoods where we have the strongest fervor for historic preservation, can this be a tool? This tool can only be used sparingly because of that definition of high merit.
Okay. Well, the reason I'm hesitant in supporting this bill is because I know in my ward, we have several properties. Some of them are historic, some of them are not, but we have properties that are currently tied up in major development deals that have been halted due to either tax credits, or we have one property that was tied up in a choice neighborhood grant, which is a $30 million grant that we received from HUD, and at this present time, we are currently getting violations from the building division due to that. When, I mean, we're all in city government, we know that there's a plan for this building. It's an eyesore. We have a homeless population that keeps starting fires and stuff in it, and so I just wouldn't want a situation to happen where the city uses this overreaching arm because a building has constantly been cited and been sitting waiting for development to take place with it, and then it gets swiped from the owner. So this is not something that I would be willing to support.
Okay. We can finish. Would it be helpful for members of the committee? This is already an ordinance, and so they're amending the present ordinance. Would it be helpful if you had a document showing where the changes they're recommending to the ordinance? Alderman Spencer.
I think so, yes, Mr. Chairman. And if I understand this correctly, by looking at section 11, I think the real issue, just kind of perusing the original board bill, there is not clear definitions of what is required of an owner to claim hardship. And so if a business owner or if a property owner wants to say, hey, look, my building is falling down, okay, according to your definition, but I don't have any money to fix it. The original board bill doesn't give a clear path to claiming hardship and to, I guess, creating a sort of a safeguard for people who can't afford to fix their building. So this amendment creates that path to claiming hardship and using that out. I haven't fully understood what that looks like, because what it does, in my mind, or my understanding, is provide what the owner has to bring, 3 years of taxes and all the items, but it doesn't, but what I'm not exactly clear on is what the board would use as criteria for determining whether or not you actually have hardship.
Right. Okay.
That's what's spelled out in the
Yes,
update.
and then, so this says, you know, it does, my question is whether or not it's a hardship to provide some of this information. Architectural drawings, a report from an architect, that being required could in and of itself be a hardship, am I right? Or is there an out for that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if members of the committee have questions, I'm happy to take those down and address them and get you some more information before we meet again, just so that people have a full understanding about what the bill is.
That'd be good.
I-
We're having,
We can have Frank come down too, the building commissioner.
we have at least one more meeting.
Right, yeah, no, I'm happy to provide people with more information if they feel like that would be helpful in making a decision.
I believe so. Alderman Spencer.
I commend the effort to make it at least more clear how somebody could claim hardship, because I do appreciate from the original bill, it's not exactly clear how you would say, I have economic hardship that's disabling me from doing this. And making that more clear would help the city enforce this better, but also safeguard people who do actually have an economic hardship, if we can do it right. I mean, but so I think that's where I appreciate the intent of the bill.
Did you have any questions for, we're going to hold the bill, but if there are any questions that you have, you can give to the sponsor now or later.
Just one question, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarity, so this is not only limited to publicly owned LRA property, but any vacant property for over 50 years in the city?
That's part of it, yes. That's not it in its totality.
It has to be determined to be a high-merit building, which means it has to be eligible for individual listing on for the National Register, or a significant building in a National Register district. Almost all buildings in the city do not meet that criteria. So this will only apply to a very small segment of our total buildings in the city.
And you said 10% of the total stock.
This is an estimate off the top of my head. I would say it's probably less than 10% of the buildings in the city of St. Louis meet the definition of high merit in Ordinance 64689, the ordinance that is the enabling ordinance for the Preservation Board and the Cultural Resources Office.
Right. Where's the largest influx of this less than 10%?
I would say the neighborhood with highest concentration of high merit buildings is downtown, because those are our largest, most significant, individual buildings. As I said, most buildings in the city of St. Louis are a single-family home, or a two-family, or a four-family, or a six-family, and most of those buildings, unless someone famous slept there, are not individually eligible for listing on the National Register.
To your point, though, this would have been a tool that could have been utilized possibly to save the Samuel Clements building, which is something that people talk about quite a bit.
So I see the good to it, but I also see the bad. It's almost like it's eminent domain, sophisticatedly hidden.
It doesn't allow for demolition. It protects the building from being demolished.
But you're still taking property from a property owner.
It doesn't strip the owner of their ownership. It can require them to fix up their building or to make certain repairs to their building. It can give the building commissioner the authority to have those repairs made. But, and that's in the ordinance that's already been approved by the Board of Aldermen. And again, it was designed to look at buildings. As I said, the impetus for this was the loss of one of the buildings in Couples Station. So we're talking about, significant structures. The average homeowner will not be affected by this ordinance, is not affected by this ordinance.
The homeowners are not. The average homeowner isn't.
The average
but
homeowner or property owner would not be affected by this
neighborhood
ordinance.
could be affected,
It would be
though.
the most, this ordinance has not been used yet.
Yet.
There's been no effort to use it. But, the ethos behind it is that, folks who buy a high-merit building, particularly since often they're major buildings, they're buying them with the goal of an economic benefit. And this tries to put a floor underneath how much they can let that building deteriorate before some action is taken.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can support the bill. I really don't understand it. And it seems, to me, it seems like eminent domain, is how I see it. I look forward to the sponsor giving us more information on the bill. I would like to see the previous ordinance that was passed.
It
too.
should be before you.
But I don't see the difference in the language. I want to see exactly what is she taking out, what is she adding. So I see this. I got that. I want to see the changes.
Sure. Yeah, it's just
Highlight
the
it.
addition. What you have before you, there's nothing taken out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Also, it's nothing taken out, it's just more added.
Correct.
Okay, so we will hold the bill.
Yep. I've got a list of questions written down. If you don't mind, I'll just confirm with you that I got everything covered, and then
That'd
we'll
be
get
fine.
those in an answer to you.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
And I think it would help the committee also to have a written definition of what's high merit.
Sure.
That'd give a sense of the number of buildings that could be affected by it. Sure. Okay?
Thank you
Yes.
for your time.
May I state about the underlying bill? It's certainly not anything that the city would do surreptitiously. It's got a lot of process. It actually starts in the cultural resources with this gentleman, then it goes to a board of the Historic Preservation Board, and they have to vote to decide if it's even going to be referred to the building division. Then the building division has the opportunity to meet with the property owner, and then he decides if anything further is going to happen. And if there is further action, the person gets a full and fair hearing. And in fact, if they claim economic hardship, they get a full and fair hearing on that. So it's certainly nothing that is not out in the light of day. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. So all that information will be helpful. We will hold the bill and bring it back up in the next.
I'm happy to provide that.
Okay. So that takes us then to Board Bill 189.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. You have before you Board Bill 189, which is an update to the Lafayette Square Neighborhood Historic District standards. We've had a couple of bills go through different committees, but this is applicable to the Shoto Corridor redevelopment project in Lafayette Square. And we are updating the standards and also did passed a SUD, the overlay, zoning overlay, out of the HUD's committee last week. This area of Lafayette Square is about 13 acres of former industrial site, and so doesn't really fit in necessarily with the historic district's standards that were currently in place. It was too restrictive, and I think was the reason for a number of failed developments there in the past. And so this is an update that the Neighborhood Association worked on with the alderman from the 7th Ward and myself, as well as Cultural Resources, passed the Preservation Board and is now before us here at the Board of Aldermen. So I'm happy to take questions, and I have Dan Krasnoff here with Cultural Resources to answer specific standard questions, and then a representative from Lafayette Square as well.
There are some sections that are italicized. Are these what the changes are?
You should have some changes, highlighted changes before you in that document. Sure.
We can take questions from members of the committee. Alderman Boyd.
No, I don't really have any questions at this time. Since I sit on the planning commission, I'm kind of familiar with the process and their due diligence on this.
Alderman Picaro.
I don't have any questions.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
No questions.
Alderman Kotor.
No questions. I'd like to thank Christine and Mr. Krasnoff and the neighborhood for all their work on this.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just for clarity, these are new standards that have gone through the Planning Commission. They've gone through they are approved and supported by the neighborhood. And they're just before us for final approval as far as an ordinance is concerned.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Alderman Muhammad.
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Well, do you have any, that's everyone. Any closing remarks?
No, I appreciate your support of Board Bill 189.
Okay, then, we can entertain a motion.
I move that we pass Board Bill 189 with a due pass recommendation.
Been moved and seconded, we pass Board Bill 189 with a due pass recommendation. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Cone. Alderman Arnowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderman Coder. Alderwoman Spencer.
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd. Chairman Kennedy.
Aye.
You have 7 aye votes, Mr. Chairman.
By your vote, you sustain the motion, pass with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. The last board bill to take up is Board Bill 170, sponsored by Alderman Boyd.
Good morning. My name is Michael Warwick.
He'll start us out since he's here. He's back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Board Bill 170 is a board bill sponsored by myself at the request of the Circuit Attorney, and we have with us today Michael Warwick, and he'll tell you what his position is with the Circuit Attorney's office. But it's a real simple bill, but I want him to be able to explain it, you know, where it makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
Again, my name is Michael Warwick. I'm Chief of Staff with the Circuit Attorney's Office. And good morning to Mr. Chair and to the committee. This is a simple bill. This is the federal government trying to give us some money. It's approximately $248,407, and they want to help us establish a conviction integrity unit within the Circuit Attorney's Office. And We're requesting that you go forward with this bill, and it has an emergency clause. The conviction integrity basically allows us to investigate cases or claims of actual innocence to determine whether new evidence gives rise to a substantial probability that an individual may or may not be innocent. So this is money coming from the federal government. We would like to go forward with establishing this unit. If there's any questions?
Alderman Vaccaro, any questions?
No questions?
Alderwoman Hubbard, any questions?
What was the total amount of the grant again? You
It's
said it-
$248,000 and $248,407. $248,407.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Alderman Kotor.
Do we have a copy of the contract?
We can provide you with a copy of the contract.
That'd just be, I mean, that'd be helpful, just, I'm not going to vote against this, but just
Okay, so you
for our own records and also just to look at it. Second question, does the shutdown, I mean, is his money already been appropriated by the, like, is the money sitting in a city account somewhere?
No, we have not deposited the money, but we do have the money.
Okay.
And so we need your approval in order to deposit
But
the
you've
money.
got a check. You're waiting for a, no.
Please identify yourself.
My name is Anthony Box. I'm with the Circuit Attorney's Office. We have not received the money. We need the approval from the Board of Aldermen before the federal government will send it to us.
And in the midst of this shutdown, will the money actually be transferred, or do we have to wait till they reopen the government?
I have received multiple emails from the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Program to let me know that they are still operating, so we will get the money.
Great. Last question, do we have any idea who's going to, can you talk to me about who this unit's going to be comprised of? How many attorneys, how many investigators?
The funding, the proposal was for one attorney and one investigator.
All right, do we know who that attorney is going to be?
We have not, no, we do not.
How about the investigator?
No, we do not.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Alderwoman Spencer.
No questions, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Muhammad.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Please give my greetings to the circuit attorney. I think she's doing a fantastic job.
Thank you, sir.
No other questions? Alderman, do you have any closing remarks?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a copy of the contract. I'll submit to the clerk, and if he can make a copy for the committee, that'd be helpful.
Well, after the meeting, we can. Thank you. Are you accepting co-sponsors for the bill?
I absolutely would take co-sponsor. If there's any member of the committee would like to co-sponsor, I'd
Yes.
appreciate it.
Yeah, my name as well.
Okay? From the 5th, 7th,
Alderman, please add my name as well.
21st,
Sitting
23rd.
here so far.
Huh?
I'll join the club.
Okay, all right. It's
That's all of us.
unanimous of all of us who are here. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll close.
Okay. You asked for our favorable support on the.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm a member of the committee. I'd like to ask for Board Bill 170, move out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
I'll second it in previous role.
Been moved and seconded that we pass Board Bill 170 out with a due pass recommendation. There's been a request for previous roll. Is there any opposition to previous roll? Seeing no opposition, by your vote, we have adopted Board Bill 170 with a due pass recommendation. That does complete our agenda for today. The committee will have at least one other meeting. We do have to pass our Prop-S dollars, and then we'll bring back Alderman Ingracia's bill as well. Yes, ma'am, you had something?
Mr. Chairman, yes, with regards to that Prop S money, do we have any information for applicants at this time regarding that? I apologize, I haven't been able to serve on the subcommittee this year, but I know we have some applicants in the room.
Yeah,
And
we received, thought I sent that out to everyone. We received the scoring from United Way. You know, every year United Way
Yes.
scores, and we received that back from United Way almost 2 weeks late. Their computer programs, they had a hack and that broke down, so they were late with that. We did receive those, and we also received some recommendations from the Public Safety Director
Okay.
based upon that. And so the subcommittee is looking at that this afternoon.
Okay.
And then we'll be forwarding that information out to the committee members. Okay?
And so for anybody in the room who is an applicant, they would be welcome to come back
When we have the
the next meeting, and we'll have the proposed allocated funding for that at the next meeting, which will be next week.
Yeah, at this point, it looks like it'll be next Tuesday.
Okay.
We normally meet on Tuesday.
Okay, thank
It
you.
still gives time for other bills to be passed and get out before the end of the session.
Sure.
as a part of this process, the Prop S process, we have to pass that, as you know, by resolution. And so we already introduced the resolution last week. So we're poised to go ahead and to pass it out, and the committee makes the final decision. So with that, there's no other agenda items. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.